Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Susan Chekow-Lusignan, Director of Marketing and Program Development for the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. Thank you. FFRPL raises funds, presents programs, supports special projects, helps to create specialized spaces, and purchases supplemental materials and equipment for the Rochester Public Library. One of FFRPL's most popular programs, Book Sandwiched In, or BSI, has been running continuously since the first event was held in October 1956. So we are very glad to welcome everyone here today for this legacy program. A bit of housekeeping, we do ask that you please silence your cell phones at this time. I did get a number of questions today about the 12:12 start time. I know we have a number of new folks in the room, so I'm happy to explain that. The historical significance is that when the majority of people were working downtown in downtown Rochester offices, the lunch bell rang at noon precisely, and they timed it so there was time for everyone to walk and make a restroom stop on the way in and arrive at 12:12. Returning without a second restroom stop only took 8 minutes, so it ends at 12:52, and you would be back at your desk when the 1 o'clock lunch bell rang. So that's the historical significance. We ask that you please note the order of the final two reviews has been changed from what was originally printed on the brochure. Next week, Douglas Jones will review Kate Quinn's novel, The Diamond Eye. Our thanks go to those who help fund programs like these through FFRPL, the dedicated FFRPL committee members who curate and organize these events, our guest speakers and artists who so graciously share their time and talents with us, the library staff who help with our setup and production, and the thousands of people who attend each year. We do post the live stream events to the RPL YouTube channel at Rochester Public Library, New York. To access the induction loop in the auditorium, please set your hearing aid to the T switch. Today, Bonnie Garner will review Look for Me There by Luke Russert. Luke Russert is an Emmy award-winning journalist who is an NBC News correspondent from 2008 to 2016, primarily covering American politics. His first book is a travel memoir about his 3.5-year journey around the world that took him to more than 65 countries. Based in Washington, D.C., he is the son of journalists Maureen Orth of Vanity Fair and the late Tim Russert from NBC's Meet the Press. New York Times bestselling author Elin Hilderbrand says, Luke Russert's story of heartbreaking loss and hard-earned self-discovery captivates from start to finish. This is the memoir of the year, if not the decade. Our reviewer, Bonnie Garner, is a retired educator. Recently widowed, Bonnie was married to national film critic Jack Garner for 50 years. Please join me in welcoming Bonnie to our podium.
Thank you, Sue. Hello, everyone. Welcome. When I first got the call asking me to do this book review, I have to admit that I was very hesitant and asked for at least a day to think about it. After all, who am I to talk about my grief because it's such a personal thing, and everybody has to deal with it in their own way. I also have to admit that I'm doing something out of my comfort zone, and I think all of us have to face a challenge and try to do our best. Everyone has their own way to deal with grief. So to read somebody else's account might help me deal with my own feelings as well. I've read Joan Didion's book, The Year of Magical Thinking, several times after she wrote about the passing of her husband, and I found that very cathartic. I was also given a very little book of readings. It's this little, and it's called Healing After Loss. It has a short reading for every day of the year. I also found this helpful because the majority of the readings were very upbeat and encouraging. Just Look for Me There by Luke Russert deals with the untimely and unexpected death of his father, Tim Russert. The title of the book is a phrase that Tim Russert often used when he and his son were together at events. Once, Luke got separated from his dad, and Tim immediately located him and said, "Buddy, if we're ever separated, just look for me there," pointing to a hot dog stand with a big, memorable Oriole bird logo. He paused and looked Luke up and down and said, "But we won't ever be separated." It was June 13th, 2008, when Luke Russert received a phone call from his dad's office. When he looked at the number, he thought, "Oh, it's probably my dad checking in on me." Luke and his mother were in Florence, but his dad had left 2 days prior to go back to the States to prepare his Father's Day TV special. However, the office was calling to inform him and his mother about his father's death. NBC News decided to release the information to the public about Tim's untimely passing as soon as possible and chose Tom Brokaw, who was one of Tim's best friends, to do a special report about Tim's death. On July 5th, 2020, my husband and I were having a conversation after breakfast about our upcoming 50th wedding anniversary. Since we were in the throes of COVID, we were trying to decide what we could do to make it a memorable occasion. Suddenly, Jack said, "I'm not feeling well." So I quickly got him a glass of water, but when I turned around to give it to him, he was slumped over and not breathing. It's a moment in time that will never be forgotten. A good friend who was with me shortly after Jack passed away expressed the same concern about getting information out about Jack's death to the public as quickly as possible to avoid endless rumors. I immediately contacted Gary Craig, a noted journalist and very close friend of Jack's. He wrote an amazing column about Jack's career and sudden death. So as Luke was describing his feelings of shock and disbelief, I could totally identify with those feelings. Although Luke was only 22 years old and completely devastated by his father's passing, he insisted upon delivering the eulogy. He's a little concerned about writing what he considers the most important words of his life until he remembers that his dad had written about loss. He grabs a copy of his father's memoir, Big Russ and Me, and turns to a page discussing death. Quote, "When people are confronted with a crisis, particularly the death of a loved one, the most important thing is to reach out to them, help them, because they can't go through their loss alone. It is inexplicable in their lives at this time. You have to be there for them and help them to understand. There is something here to accept. This is out of your control. This is a power far beyond yours." If any of you have experienced the loss of a dear one in your life, you know how important it is to rely on family and friends. My children and grandchildren all live out of town, but they immediately came home for the funeral. My youngest daughter stayed with me for 6 weeks until all of my children and their families returned once again to Rochester to help me celebrate what would have been Jack's and my 50th wedding anniversary. However, we were still dealing with COVID, so it was difficult to get together with close friends. I was so grateful to have so many wonderful friends who surrounded me with comfort and love, and many of them are here today. Unfortunately, the grief and the loneliness was sometimes just unbearable, but I knew I could always count on my friends and family for consolation. Tim's words inspired Luke, and he immediately writes furiously, never stopping until he's finished with the eulogy. When it's done, he looks it over. He can't figure out where it came from, but it's there, and it's good. He immediately cracks 2 beers, toasts his dad, and thanks him. In fact, his eulogy was so impressive that he was immediately approached by TV executives who wanted him to be a youth reporter talking about politics. He settles on an offer, of course, with NBC News and immediately became a hit. Over the next 8 years, he becomes totally engrossed in his work, but eventually begins to get disillusioned, feeling unhappy and unfulfilled. The stress of the job was beginning to take its toll, and he was suffering from anxiety and concerned about having a heart attack like his father. Luke realizes that he never fully processed his grief for his dad. He spent so much time honoring Tim's legacy that he never really accepted his death. Worse, by honoring that legacy, he failed to forge his own life. Here he is, 30 years old, and he has no idea who he was independent from his parents. Luke dreams of walking away from television, his hometown, and his existing life. He has no idea what his purpose is, and he wonders if he has the courage to find out. So, he decides to confront reality and travel. In October 2016, Luke takes his first big leap and decides to take a test trip and travel all of Route 1 up the Maine coastline with his dog and a pickup truck. He is testing his ability to travel hours alone, spending nights in motels, and making unplanned stops. He realizes that the power of aloneness, those hours, those miles alone in his truck with only his dog, music, and thoughts, has helped open his mind to self-discovery. He's free to understand himself, to think about all that has happened, his dad's death, his career, and his future. He knows that he has not done enough to think beyond what's expected of him, and more importantly, what he expects from himself. This mini test trip made Luke realize that travel was the key to discovering his life's purpose. Thus begins his 3.5-year journey through 6 continents and more than 60 countries. So Luke decides to leave his career, find himself in solo travel. He approaches his mother with the idea, and she not only welcomes it, but makes him promise to visit Patagonia. She had visited it in the past, and it had left a special spellbinding impression on her. In fact, she was so intent on it, she insisted that he go there first, and she would follow his progress with texts and guide him by recounting her past experiences there. Next on his list after Patagonia is Latin America, but this came with strings attached. Previously, Luke's mother had asked him that if he went to Latin America, could she join him? She hadn't been to Buenos Aires for many years. Well, Luke's a little nervous about this, but also a little excited because for the past 30 years and the 8 since his father passed away, he and his mother have never gone somewhere alone together. He's hoping that this might be a new chapter in his relationship with his mother. She's quite an accomplished person, having been in the Peace Corps, a celebrated journalist, special correspondent to Vanity Fair, a documentary film maker, and a philanthropist, as well as a best-selling author. So Luke and his mother head off to Buenos Aires, where Luke runs into a close friend who invites him and his mother over for a Thanksgiving dinner party. More than 20 people are there, and Tim's mother immediately marches around the living room, asking questions and talking to everyone. Well, she then becomes the focal point of the party, and everyone falls in love with her, and Luke is amazed. Luke and his mother continue to travel through Latin America, visiting Uruguay and Paraguay, and the trip cements their relationship. Luke realizes that without her encouraging him to travel, he would not have the courage to do this. In fact, as he's having a drink the night before she departs, he realizes he wants to hold on to that memory forever. He states, "I never once thought about holding memories of my father in real time because I expect to have him around much longer. I will not make the same mistake with my mom." This is a wonderful reminder that we should never take anything for granted. Those precious moments spent with someone may be your last, so never lose those memories. Luke's journeys takes him many places around the world, some of which Jack and I have visited as well. One place that he goes to, that really stood out in my mind was Ephesus. Luke's descriptions were so detailed and precise that it brought to mind strong memories when Jack and I were traveling in Turkey in 2011. Luke is visiting the Bobol Mountains. For Catholics, this is a very special place because it's where the Virgin Mary spent the last years of her life. In the late 1800s, a group of French priests set out to find Mary's house. On a wooded, rocky slope near a stream was a house unlike any other, and it was made of stone. This discovery, combined with the disciple John's documented presence in Ephesus and Jesus' request of John to take care of his mother after his crucifixion, proved enough for the French priests to say the Virgin Mary lived out her days on this mountain. On top of the original foundation, a new stone structure has been reconstructed. The house is a small scale and gives a sense of serenity as you approach it. It is very quiet, and inside is a shrine of the Virgin Mary. Beneath a stone archway is an altar. The small scale of the house, the total quiet, the mystical energy lurking in its foundation, it gives off a unique feeling of intimacy. Outside is a wishing wall, a large fence where visitors write down their prayer requests. Both Jack and I wrote a prayer and tucked it into the gaps in the wall. Reading this passage brought back such pleasurable memories, and Luke's descriptions were so detailed, I felt as if I was there with him. This was a deeply reflective place for Luke, and he felt a sense of purpose. In fact, he states that a voice in his head takes over, exclaiming, "I'm supposed to be here. I'll know how far to go. I feel it, and I believe in Ephesus." So Luke continues to travel to Africa, Senegal, Zimbabwe, and Rwanda. And his mother once again joins him for the last part of the journey in Rwanda for a Tanzanian safari, which was her trip before I die request. Luke's description at their encounter with a huge gorilla is amazing. It's a great part of the book. After his trip to Africa in February 2018, and after visiting more than 30 countries in the last 18 months, he's asked by his mother to return home. His most dreaded fear is realized when his mother said that it's time to get focused, and life is not all fun and games. And her most direct point was, you need to do something. You need to settle down and not just drift. He's not ready to give in and wants to continue traveling, but his mother tells him that if he does continue to travel, then you need to support yourself, and she will not be supporting him anymore. Well, he's not happy with this discussion. He gets up and storms out of the house. Luke doesn't really care, because the nest egg from his dad will suffice with some belt tightening and budgeting. So his response is to immediately head to Nepal and Sri Lanka, where he becomes impatient, testy, tired, angry, Nothing seems to go the way he wants it to go, and he gets very upset and anxious. He's becoming very disenchanted and unhappy with his transient lifestyle, and this has manifested itself by moodiness and impatience. So once again, he heads back to the comfort of home. Excuse me. It's been almost 10 years since his dad passed away, and still in his attic at home are boxes belonging to his father. His goal is to figure out which boxes his mother and he should keep, and which should go to a library or a university if they have any interest. It takes more than 2 months for him to go through the 50 boxes of memorabilia, and it's a very emotional task. In fact, it's been so daunting that he realized that he needs to get away before the 10-year anniversary of his father's death. He doesn't want to have anything to do with remembrances or any kind of celebration in his memory. So, of course, what does he do? He hops on a plane and heads to Iceland, and from there, he goes to the World Cup in Russia. At the end of the summer, he returns to Los Angeles to attend the Primetime Emmy Awards, where he will accompany his mother, who is up for 18 awards. Along with all her other accomplishments, her 20-year-old book titled Vulgar Favors was the basis of the hit TV series, The Assassination of Giannini Versace. After a rude awakening by a visit to his cardiologist, where he learns that his lifestyle is contributing to his weight gain and heart issues, Luke decides to leave DC and head west. He begins to write and to get into shape. He becomes mesmerized by writing, but he is also haunted by the fact that he can't ignore a whisper in his head. You must go to the Holy Land. He admits that he's afraid of the solemnity of the Holy Land, and he was not ready for what the Holy Land will tell him about his faith and himself. Tim was a very devout Catholic, and he instilled that in his son. In the last chapter of the book, called Salvation, Luke's visiting Jerusalem makes an incredible impression on him. And I quote in Luke's words, "There in old Jerusalem, I realize it. Dad, I'll never lose you because you're here no matter what. I don't have to look for you. Your love is within me. And as you wrote once, you just want me to live a good, decent, and meaningful life. A life that I choose. A life I don't second guess for choosing. A life that expands as my curiosities do. A life I can be proud of. That's enough, and I'm enough." Luke has finally come full circle. The epilogue of the book is quite appropriate because his father, who published his 2005 memoir entitled Big Russ and Me, ended his book with a letter to his son. In Luke's book, he explains how difficult it was to actually read the letter, but when he finally did, he realized how valuable it was to him. So Luke's book ends with a letter to his dad, and it's very moving and beautifully written and is the perfect ending to the book. I really enjoyed the book, and I found his writing and vivid descriptions of the various places he visited were quite alluring. Following all his adventures was exciting, and I felt as though I was accompanying him on his journey. I'm sure Jack would have appreciated this memoir as well because the descriptions were so graphic and Luke was so expressive in his emotions and feelings. Jack and I love to travel, and we did a lot of traveling. Once we retired, we traveled even more frequently. I continue to travel, and Jack goes right along with me because his ashes always accompany me and are scattered at all the places I visit in all the various countries. And you might be surprised where some of those ashes are. We can talk about that later. In fact, in a couple of weeks, I will have the pleasure of traveling with my 3 adult children to the lower Danube area, visiting Istanbul and Budapest, which both Jack and I have visited. We will all toast to Jack and leave his ashes in the places we visited, and I'm sure crack open a couple of beers to celebrate his legacy. I would like to leave you with a short poem called Separation that was written by the late U.S. poet laureate W.S. Merwin. Its 19 words capture the great feeling of loss when you lose someone dear to you. Separation. Your absence has gone through me like thread through a needle. Everything I do is stitched with its color. Thank you.